You mentioned off the top of the show, Jeff, that the Champions Trophy is next for Australia's men. Not really sure whether we know what's going on with Steve Smith's elbow yet. There was that hyperextension moment when they were 9 down as well, Sri Lanka in the second dig. He threw a ball in and was clearly hurt. One would assume that they'll just take him and give him the chance to get fit across 9 days. But if he doesn't, they'll have other captaincy options. You would think it's Travis Head for reasons of future-proofing, given that Head's the vice-captain formally. But there's other options. Josh Inglis. Yeah. But Inglis did as well, didn't he, at one point? Maybe the Scotland games, possibly?
Yeah.
I feel like he captained
Inglis
some of them.
did ODIs, I think, and Head
he did the
T20.
ones he did when they got pumped by Pakistan, and it was... Remember that was cricketing crisis when Pakistan beat Australia in a bilateral series a few months ago when it was pretty clear that Australian cricket was going to be burnt to the ground around that. Inglis captained them. Adam Zampa could captain Australia, I reckon. Glenn Maxwell, it's not crazy if they want to have an experienced hand on the tiller for a tournament. But probably Steve Smith, and he's probably fine. But, no Cummins confirmed. Congratulations to Pat and Becky as well, by the way, the arrival of their daughter, which is pretty cool. He's now a girl dad, and she is a girl mum, which is cool. Josh Hazlewood missing, as we thought. Mitch Marsh confirmed as missing with his back problem, which is a bit of a poorly timed injury for Mitch Marsh, given that it's not long after he's been left out of the test side. And then we have the Marcus Stoinis one-day retirement, despite having been named in the Champions Trophy squad.
And unexpectedly named in the Champions Trophy squad that we thought he'd be left out of. He's been given a lifeline, and then he's gone, no thanks. What's going on?
It's body stuff.
I'm puzzled here.
Well, he was in South Africa playing in whatever that is, and he didn't. I read a news report saying that he played a couple of games or something. But the IPL immediately follows the Champions Trophy. So if you're Stoinis, would you want to run the gauntlet if your body is not 100% when you're on the way out of one-day cricket? So that might be why I'm speculating, but.
Why wouldn't you say, I've got a bit of an injury concern, I won't be able to get up for the tournament, as opposed to, I've decided it's the right time to retire?
Might it be like a little bit more nuanced than that he doesn't want to make it sound as brazen as I've presented it? By retiring now, he doesn't have to kind of say quite a bit out loud about I can't risk my IPL contract, because they're paid out.
But he could say
he
was currently injured. He could say, I have an injury, I have an issue that I need to manage. That won't allow me to play in time.
Yeah. Well, maybe he had to retire because the injury wasn't really that substantial, whatever the injury is. Maybe it was on the minor scale, and they would have, as a nationally contracted player, like CA are entitled to play him, right? So retiring.
Get him on the blower. What's going on?
What's going on?
Get him on the phone. He can talk to our 1,000th patron.
Yeah.
And while he's there, we'll ask what's going on.
74 one-dayers. Jeff, you were there for that one extraordinary century at Auckland in 2017, commentating on New Zealand radio. Average 27. I sort of feel like more than the sum of his parts. I know he didn't play in the pointy end of the 23 World Cup, but played his role there. Crucial wickets against Pakistan, vital runs against Sri Lanka in 2 games they had to win after getting in a hole. For a time there that, he was one of the first names on the team sheet in one-day cricket. And, of course, he's still got a T20 career to go on with. But your assessment of Marcus Stoinis, 50-over cricketer?
Yeah, well, it started so extraordinarily that he was never able to live up to it. It was, 147 thereabouts? I didn't look it up, but something like that, unbeaten in this absurd run chase that they had no chance of getting. You could say it was Bevan areas, but it was a very different approach. It was all power. It was 6 hitting. And that final partnership, I think the 10th wicket partnership with Hazlewood, it was 50 plus. It was either 52 or 54, of which Hazlewood did not face a ball, let alone...
run out, right? Didn't Hazlewood get run out at the non-strikers?
Run out at the non-strikers end. Kane Williamson picks it up at a short straight mid-on, and Hazlewood's out of his ground and the stumps are flicked down. So not only didn't Hazlewood make a run, he didn't have to face a ball in the entire partnership, and Stoinis very nearly got them there. So I think that you can't start that way and then not have people expect you to do that, not every day, but maybe every 5th or 10th or whatever it is. That never really happened in one-day cricket. Probably had more of his moments in the 20-over form, but he did have an important job to do, and it was often to do with the bowling as much as the batting, which people would forget about, where you'd have Mitchell Marsh, who wasn't reliable to bowl much. And Stoinis had enough pace. He could swing the new ball a bit. He could seam it. He could bowl difficult overs. He often did that in the IPL, where he'd have bad economy rates and so on, or bad-looking economy rates, because he'd be bowling the kind of overs that got attacked. And he had a sharp enough bouncer, and we saw that against Pakistan at the Chinnaswamy, wasn't it? When Pakistan were cruising a couple of times in the World Cup, he got both openers out with his short ball because he was deceptive. So he had that job to do with the ball as well as whatever he did with the bat, which sometimes frustrated people. Sometimes he'd find it a bit hard to turn over strike or find himself stuck on at a certain end for a bit too long. But he definitely had his moments with the bat, and when it clicked, when it came off, there weren't many more destructive players going around.
Yeah, and look, I think that injury in the 2019 World Cup was so poorly timed for him as well. Like, I think it was a hammy, wasn't it? He got back.
Maybe it was like I feel like it was a side strain or something like that. It was a small one, and he kept trying to play through it, and he couldn't quite get through his bowling action.
That's that era I referred to where he was one of the first names on the team sheet, like where he was on his day a genuine match winner, both with bat and ball. 23. I mean, he's still a World Cup winner. You get the World Cup winners medal even if you're the 12th man in the final, because he was the one who, when they rocked up on World Cup final day at Ahmedabad, the question was, will they pick Stoinis? Will they make the change? It was improbable, but with one of Smith or Labuschagne, and that was never really on the cards. But, they could have left out Labuschagne for Stoinis for an extra bowling option. They had a vital performance from Labuschagne batting with Travis Head, so no dramas there. But I reckon he'll be the first of a number of one-day retirements from Australia's team this year. This is the other part of the Stoinis thing that's worth noting. Australia are hosting South Africa for one-dayers in August, which is a weird time to host one day. Top end one day. That's good, by the way. No problem with that. However, what's August? Franchise cricket window. So I think from memory, it definitely clashes with the 100, and Stoinis is one of the highest paid players in the 100, but there'll be others in that boat as well who are high-profile Australian white ball cricketers who have MLC.
Is major leagues around then?
I've got a feeling Major League is just before 100. Either way, it's in the mix, right? Major League
overlaps
cricket
to some extent.
Right, it may well do. Major League cricket, the 100, some might play in like the Caribbean Premier League as well. It's all happening at the same time. It's so much more lucrative than playing for them anyway, playing a series on their existing CA contract. So, take someone like Smith. Might Smith retire from one-day cricket at the end of the Champions Trophy? And he clearly wants to play MLC, like he's been very upfront about that. I think the MLC might actually clash a little bit with the Windies Test matches as well, which is going to be a challenge for some of them. But anyway, put that to one side. Maybe Smith retires and then comes out of retirement like Ben Stokes did before the next 50-over World Cup, given that's 2 and a bit years away. You'd almost have time to go into retirement zone and play T20 only and Test cricket, of course, and then have enough time to build up for a World Cup, given how little bilateral one-day cricket is, and it would help solve their short-term scheduling issues.
I suppose it's a possibility. It's whether Smith's got the hunger for the workload, given that World Cup wouldn't be until after the Ashes in 27, given they've got such an intense Test match year leading up to it, something like 17 tests in 8 months or something like that in the lead up.
Yeah.
Whether he'd actually be up for a World Cup after that, although like we mentioned, he did say he wants to go to the Olympics in 2028. Yeah.
Last bit of Australian stuff before we go to a break here, Jeff. Mentioned already there'll be a selection squeeze for the World Test Championship final. We'll document that as we go through. I wonder whether we can manifest the Constas to county cricket thing. I wonder whether, if we keep saying it enough, whether a county, ideally Middlesex for the purpose of Australia, him playing some games at Lord's, right, whether that can happen. I mean, there was a really nice interview that Constas did with Brett Egg during the Test series before he went home about how emotional he was at Melbourne and Sydney, and he kind of might have got the emotions out of check, which was quite perceptive from the young man to realise even only a few weeks later that he was swept up in all of that. But yeah, this is a good problem for Australia to have, and how they might deploy their resources in the early part of the England summer. Cameron Green playing for Gloucestershire being one of those. Bo Webster's at Warwickshire, although I don't think he starts there until later in the season. But you know what I'm trying to say, right?
There's always an Australian at Durham. Why can't Sam Constas go to Durham?
Scotty Boland played at Durham briefly last year. But Steve Smith's a good example of this. He played 4 games for Sussex in 2023 before the WTC final and the Ashes. I don't think he would go there before, but he might. There could be an argument for a couple of them getting a couple of games. So that'll be something to watch for in the weeks to come.
Yeah, the Scotty Boland mentioned, I liked Andrew McDonald's line when he was talking about the batting squeeze and saying the squeeze is good and said, look at the bowling. Scott Boland, he said, he's entitled to think that he should start every test match. And bloody oath, he is. He is entitled to think that. It's just hard when you've got 4 quicks of that quality. If they're all fit, what do you do?
Race.
People go, oh, Boland's past Hazelwood. And I'm like, Hazelwood took his wickets at 13 the previous year.
You get
he went okay.
You get a bit of this. You get a bit of this on socials, don't you? That like there's effusively saying that Boland is better than Hazelwood. I'm like, okay, just
Boland's
zoom out
played
here.
more recently than Hazelwood.
Yeah. Let's zoom out. Boland has had an outstanding Test match 2 weeks ago and did everything asked of him during the Border Gavaskar. But does that automatically mean that he is a more dangerous asset for Australia? It's not clear cut. It isn't black and white. These things really are. Jeff, we better get off to a break. We'll return in a sec. This is the Final Word Season 17, Episode 23. We're sort of drifting towards the end of the season. I suppose we'll call stumps on that at the end of March.
Oh, it'll be a while. Yeah, can't start until the county season begins.
Throughout Season 17, we've got with us our dear friends at Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. And Jeff, as you know, I've been talking a little bit about super insurance over the last few days. This is not the most straightforward conversation. Occasionally it can get quite complex, but actually, you've heard me speak about it for 4 days. Yeah. Why don't you give me your take on how you're interpreting it, and then we'll get to the call to action.
Here's how I'm wrapping it. Obviously, superannuation, that's your retirement plan. That's a good thing. CBUS, we've talked about that for a long time. A lot of people have, with their superannuation, they have an insurance policy. Most people have it by default. You can switch it off manually, but it's generally there when you start a fund, which covers you if you have injury or illness that means that you can't do that job anymore. But some insurance companies, and, this would be a very controversial statement, but sometimes insurance companies don't like paying out the money that they owe. I know this will shock a lot of people, but it has occasionally, there have been instances of this happening. Sometimes you need a good employment workplace lawyer who knows how to make sure that you get paid what you should get paid if you are one of those people who finds yourself in that position where you've had an injury or an illness and you're owed a payout through your super insurance and it hasn't come through. You might not even know that you're owed it. That might have happened to you and you might not even be aware that that's something that you're entitled to. So it's worth asking your superannuation company, and it's worth asking someone like Murray Bees to look into it because that's one of the things they specialise in. Is that right?
Yeah, that's how I've been trying to articulate it when I've been kind of sticking to the script more than you have there. But yeah, total and permanent disability benefit. So that's a lump sum benefit where it's different from your super account balance, and there's a number that you'll be able to access if you can't work for reasons that you've just stated there. So this is where, in their experience, like when people are claiming on their own, there's the risk of it not quite working out. So that's where Maurice Blackburn step in. And as we've described before on the podcast, they're Australia's largest plaintiff superannuation practice, which means they're working hard for your results. And the no win, no fee arrangement means that you only pay legal fees if and when you win. And the fees are clearly explained at the start of the process as well. So we'll tell you more about super insurance and Maurice Blackburn throughout the course of February. Search Maurice Blackburn Super Insurance to find out more.
Speaking of super, what about the superchargers? The 100, the sell-offs, the flog-offs, 6 teams out of 8 have been sold. But the superchargers, the northern superchargers, they're the Yorkshire lot.
Yep.
They have sold the whole lot. Most of the clubs have done the 51% thing where they keep 51%, so they've got effective control, and they sell 49%, so they get the cash influx, but they've still got the voting rights in theory, although the other 49% can exert a fair amount of pressure on them. Northern superchargers have gone, bugger it, Sunrisers Hyderabad, have the whole lot, throw in the steak knives, have the club, you own it outright, which is interesting.
This was to be expected. And Colin Graves has been talking about this publicly.
Of course, because they're broke as hell.
Yeah, to the extent to which they were on the cusp of going broke. I think a lot of these clubs have priced in doing well out of this, but it's gone so much better than anticipated. And, the Welsh Fire sold 49% to the bloke who owns the Washington Freedom, or the group that own the Washington Freedom. But there's a digital tech head at the front of all of that.
Steve Smith and Cameron Ponsonby will be sorted for life now that the Washington Freedom are in town.
It is interesting though, isn't it? Because there are a bunch of Aussies at play there. It's Steve Smith, but Glenn Maxwell, Travis Head. So of course they're going to want synergy between their different teams.
Synchrony.
synchronicity. Whether they can get that, though, with the schedule the way that it is, fucked if I know. Like, are they going to be able to get their players to go from MLC to the 100? This is all the stuff that's going to play out and shake out over years to come. The Mumbai Indians have confirmed, Surrey confirmed yesterday that Mumbai Indians, that their ownership have bought 49% there, and everyone seems very happy. So I'm deferring the longer chat on this to when I've got Will McPherson with us, but I will note that Will has tweeted here that Chelsea owner Todd Bowley has bought a 49% stake in the Trent Rockets, which is one of the teams yet to be formally sold, at least publicly anyway. So that would be interesting as well, seeing an owner of a Premier League club.
Chelsea, so I mean, who wouldn't want him involved? Well,
the franchise was valued at 80 mil, and if he's bought 49%, I guess there is. Who knows? It might go for more than that.
Tell me, if you want to make me happy, tell me that the Trent Rockets, the Nottingham-based franchise, bring in José Mourinho to coach them for the next season. That is where it's going to work for me.
Well, that'll be where you see the true synergy, when you're seeing the crossover from Premier League to the 100. They would dream of that in cricket, to have a Ted Lasso style figure coming into the 100.
There's a really good billboard campaign. So obviously Uber Eats have enough money to buy whoever they want. Kim Kardashian did ads for them and whatever it is. So in Portugal, they had these big billboards about 8 months ago with, Mourinho on the ad with his bag of shopping. And it's like, the Portuguese translation is like this, on this app, you can get whatever you want, and then in brackets, except for a team to coach Mourinho, while he's standing there looking sad. I'm like, they must have had a fair bit of cash to get him to just agree to embarrass himself. But I suppose some would say he's done that at times voluntarily.
We need to get Will on to talk about this properly.
Yeah,
we're not going to be able to do. I've had so much. I've been spinning plates. You know that. We all know that. Anyone listening to this program today with my husky voice and my fucking nose full of snot will know that I'm not across the detail as much as I ordinarily would be. So will be when he's back from India. Jeff, I need you to brief me on what's going on in India. I know there's been one-day cricket. I know that India are playing England. I know it's essentially a glorified warm-up for the Champions Trophy, but I couldn't tell you who's played on either team, other than the fact that I know Kohli missed one of them injured, and Jacob Bethel's injured. And apart from that, I'm out of here. So you tell me.
Okay, fine. I will say it came with a very Ben Duckett press conference. I think I've come around. I think I've done a 180 on this. I now love a Ben Duckett press conference because they're so absurd. Because I think, as we saw in our interview with him, he's actually quite a considered person, but he has an ability to say a line in a presser which can have some legs. And his line here was, "I don't care if we get whitewashed 3-0 as long as we beat India in the Champions Trophy." So that you could say fair enough, but you could also say, in a situation where England are losing a lot and have been losing a lot for a long time, perhaps that's not the ideal way to be looking at it. They got smashed up. First ODI got bowled out for 248. India chased it inside 39 overs. Doesn't get much more comfortable than that. Butler and Bethel made 50s. So they're relying on Bethel a lot. And so then, which is a strange thing with such a young player batting 3 in the test matches, being lent on in white ball cricket, and then being absent, like you mentioned. Just by the by, Ravindra Jadeja, 3 for 26 off 9 overs, and then backed that up in the second game with where England made 300 plus. He was 1 for 35 off 10. So they have not been able to score a run off Jadeja. The first game, Kohli wasn't fit, got pulled out at the last minute. Rohit didn't make a score. Shubman Gill made 87. Shreyas made 59. They've got Akshar Patel batting at 5 in the ODIs at this point, who made 52 off 47. So handy when the bloke who can take 6s and 7s in test matches can also make you a 50 in the top 6.
Funny, isn't it? Shreyas Iyer, forgotten man of Indian cricket in some respects, isn't he? When you consider where he was in the pecking order, I guess, a couple of years ago now, having lost his test spot. I think he still went for gazillions at the IPL at the auction this year, but in one-day cricket, he's been as good as any of the Indian superstars. I know they haven't played much since the World Cup, but at the World Cup, he was a massive presence.
Yeah, I suppose until the final, where he wasn't really, and people remember stuff like that for a lot longer than any other game. Notable that Jofra Archer bowled 7 overs, took 1 for, but it feels like every game that Archer manages to bowl some overs and not get injured matters at this point. Bryden Cast got smashed around at 10 and over, so that's interesting as well, because they've been, again, relying on him quite heavily, even as a new player. Shakib Mahmood is back, took 2 for, but was expensive. Second ODI, they were a bit better. The top 6 all made some sort of score between 20-odd and 60-odd, and they made 300. They got to 304, but and on the way took down Mohammad Shami, who's trying to get on that comeback trail, who went at 8 and over in that game. But they did get bowled out again, so bowled out 2 games running, which means the 304 is probably less than they might have had if they hadn't lost wickets towards the end, while Livingston was trying to smack the ball around and keep the scoring going. Varun Chakravarti, decent as well. He's been having a really good streak in the white ball stuff. And then India just chased it so easily again, so they make 300, but India got it inside 45 overs. And this time, Kohli did play, didn't make any. Rohit played, made 100, and didn't just make 100, made a Rohit 100, 112 off 90 balls, just took Shakib Mahmood apart early, was just cover driving him for 6 and all kinds of nonsense. Hit 7 sixes and 12 fours on the way. Finally, you see a bit of Rohit batting the way that you know he can bat, where he's looked so miserable and out of sorts recently. Gus Atkinson got pumped. Mark Wood got pumped. Adil Rashid got pumped. So, yeah, things just aren't looking that great for England after they got done 4-1 in the T20s. And I'd refer people to Barney Rono with the, you know that he wrote the BazBall is a cult piece during the 23 Ashes, and that got people very exercised, some of them. So he's followed up with, it's not a cult, it's a death cult, where he's like, they're locked in this spiral of losing all the time without acknowledging that it matters. So he said you look at the women's series, the Lions, and the men's in recent times, like since the start of January, basically, they played 16 matches, lost 14. And won once. The quote that stood out: the best part of the past 3 years has been watching some much-loved players producing wonderful Test cricket moments. The worst part in the death cult trajectory of 2025 is the sense that we are now post-winning, post-clarity, post-sport, that the BazBall interlude has been like someone making a really cool music video on the deck of a sinking ship.
It's a good line. I mean, I think that the bit of the piece that I appreciated was that he's right in saying that because originally, like, it was the men's test team, right? The men's test team was coached by Brendan McCullum, change of direction in 2022. And it was, anyone who denies this, I mean, from time to time, you see people dispute the fact that it's real, right? But then you look at the numbers and look at the way that they radically changed the way they played. Historically, were scoring quicker than anybody. It was reaping results, and they were doing it in unusual ways, chasing down enormous fourth innings chases, which history would suggest were harder than they were. They did something in 2022, which morphed into 2023. No one has hit Josh Hazlewood and Pat Cummins for 5 and over across a series ever, and no one ever will ever again. It is and was a real thing. The issue, as Barney explains in his piece quite neatly, is that because of that block of time, it's the tentacles of BazBall have gone all over English cricket. It is the dominant, hegemonic, if you like, philosophical starting point across the board. And there was criticism of the women's team after the World Cup last year to this effect, and I'm sure that'll be borne out in the review they're doing post their disastrous Women's Ashes campaign under the leadership of John Lewis. The choice for Andrew Flintoff to coach the Lions team, which I'm not dismissing out of hand, by the way. Like, I'm not saying that Andrew Flintoff is a bad thing for the England youth set up to have with them through the junior ranks, but the fact that is on the back of, was discussed at the time, not a lot of robust coaching qualifications, very much a vibe sing, very BazBall in theory, and that McCullum's also taken over the white ball teams in that space of time. So it's not just about the men's test team anymore. It's a wider cultural starting point for all of the England teams. And I think that's where this kind of piece resonates.
Well, I think the point, as you know, just aside from having some nice paragraphs that are enjoyable, the incisive point that Barney actually makes is that white ball cricket is much more analytical, really, than Test cricket a lot of the time, and it needs to be, because you need to be precise about who you're using when in an innings, what your matchups are, and all that sort of thing. So you can rejuvenate a Test team more on the basis of vibes more viably than you can in either of the white ball formats, and that you need to be specific. You need to have planning. It can't just be like, go out there and have a good time and express yourself. It has to be, what are we going to do with 20 overs or with 50 overs as a bowling team, as a batting team? And that's what McCullum doesn't really have and doesn't bring to it. So, yeah. I mean,
they're timing their run. Yeah, sorry, just to jump in quickly. They're timing their run pretty bad for this to get tough. India at home on England tracks, as we've seen in Australia, when India away are in some respects more formidable than India at home at the moment because of how ridiculously strong their seam attack is. And then they come to Australia, who, I mean, things might change, of course, but you would imagine Australia are going to have at their disposal up to 6, well, we know who the five will be, the five bowlers Australia will use, but there's others who will be in the wings as well, who are going to be licking their lips and bowling to England in more sporting conditions than were presented in 2023. So this is a bad time for them to be reaching this part of their cycle in some respects. Who knows? They might beat India 5-0 and win the Ashes in Australia. They're that kind of team as well, but it's going to take a lot, I think, from where they are right now, because they do feel like they're under the pump.
And that early, what I was going to say, that early part of the test turnaround is real, like you said, but what has happened since then has been very, very much mediocre. They've been a middling at best test side in terms of their results since that 23 Ashes, where they haven't been able to return too much despite producing a couple of remarkable wins. They've had a lot of unremarkable losses.